The basement smelled like damp concrete and old regrets. The single bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting a jaundiced light on the boxes she hadn't touched in years, her old photo albums, her wedding dress sealed in plastic, the baby clothes she'd kept from when her son was little. Dust floated through the air like ash from a fire she hadn't realized had already burned through everything. The cold was constant, not just in temperature, but in spirit, as if the very walls rejected her presence. Pipes overhead groaned now and then, like the house itself was whispering in disapproval. This had once been a place for storing memories. Now it was where she had been told to stay, not asked, told. "Just until we get things sorted," her son had said. But that was 3 weeks ago. She sat on the small twin bed they'd moved down. For her, an afterthought, its springs creaking with every sigh of her body. There was no window, no clock, no sense of time. Just silence and the muffled sounds of laughter and footsteps from upstairs, where her son and his wife went on with their lives, as though she had simply ceased to exist. Dinner smells came and went. So did mornings and nights. No one came to check on her unless they needed something, laundry done, or the Wi-Fi reset. She tried not to cry, but some nights her body betrayed her, curling into itself as sobs escaped into the stale air. She remembered when she bought this house, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, while raising a boy on her own after his father left. She worked nights at the diner, folded laundry in the evenings, taught her son to read and to pray, to stand tall and be kind. He was the kindest boy, at least she remembered him that way. He'd rush home with drawings just for her, scrawl, "I love you, Mommy," in messy crayon. He used to cry if she got so much as a paper cut. And now, he couldn't even look her in the eyes. Not when he said it. "It's just easier this way. You know how small the guest room is. Down here, you've got your own space." Her own. Space. Like a prisoner's cell was a gift. Like dignity didn't belong to women over 60. His wife stood behind him when he said it, arms folded, chin up, like she was daring her to argue. But she didn't. What was the point? Her son's eyes weren't his anymore. They were colder, sharper, like someone else was living behind them. And she wondered, what had she done to deserve this? Was she too present? Too old? Had she become the burden they whispered about behind closed doors? That night, as the basement swallowed her silence, she stared at the ceiling and imagined tearing it all down. Not out of spite, but out of aching truth. This wasn't her home anymore. Not really. It had become a house with too many doors closed on her. And yet, her name was still on the deed. That detail hadn't changed, no matter how they tried to erase her. The realization pulsed like a heartbeat. She still mattered. She still had power. They could tuck her away like a box of forgotten things, but they couldn't pretend she didn't exist, not for long. And still, the question gnawed at her. Why? Why would her own son, the child she loved more than breath, turn her into a ghost, in the very home she built? She ran her fingers over an old photograph, his 4th birthday, cake on his face, her arms around him. He was beaming. She stared at that photo until her vision blurred, wishing it could answer her. She needed to know when the boy in that photo had vanished, or if he had ever truly existed at all. She hadn't always lived in a basement. Once, this house echoed with the sounds of laughter, tiny feet thudding across hardwood floors, and lullabies, hummed under her breath while folding laundry in the dark. Every corner told a story of survival, and every inch was paid for in sweat and sleepless nights. She bought this house on a single mother's salary, working 2 jobs and taking night shifts at the hospital just to afford the down payment. She remembered signing the papers alone, heart pounding, knowing no one else would build this life for her but her. She hadn't expected ease. She expected only that if she gave her all, Her son would never have to feel the kind of hunger she once did, never have to be left behind, never have to wonder if he was loved. He was the center of her universe. Every lunch she packed, every shoe she replaced when he outgrew them too fast, every late-night school project she finished with tired hands, all of it was a vow to him. She worked cleaning houses in the mornings, waited tables at night, and still came home with stories just to make him laugh. She read to him even when her voice cracked from exhaustion. When he had the flu in the 4th grade, she stayed up all night, changing his bedsheets and holding cold compresses to his forehead. When other kids teased him for not having a father, she sat him down and made him feel proud of his name, of who he was, of what they had, because what they had was love. Pure, fierce, and unwavering. She paid for his school fees with calloused hands and aching feet. No birthday went uncelebrated, no homework unchecked. She kept every crayon drawing, every handmade Mother's Day card like they were priceless artifacts. And maybe they were. When college applications rolled around, she took out a loan in her name. She didn't even blink. He got accepted, and she cried in the car alone so he wouldn't see how scared she was about the money. Pride tasted like salt sometimes, but she swallowed it. She worked overtime. She skipped meals. She canceled her own doctor visits. But she never let him know. Never let him feel the burden she carried, so he wouldn't feel weighed down by his dreams. And he was grateful once. He used to say it. He used to kiss her cheek before heading off to school, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Mom." She believed him. She never needed much, just a little kindness, a thank you, a shared moment. When he got his first paycheck, he bought her a small gold necklace with her name on it. She wore it for years, even after the clasp broke. She kept it tucked in a jewelry box upstairs, too sacred to throw away. Even when he married, she welcomed his wife with open arms. She gave them the master bedroom without question, happy to take the smaller guest room. She let go of little habits to make room for new ones, embraced silence where once there had been chatter, learned not to offer advice unless asked. She didn't want to be in the way. She just wanted to belong. She just wanted to remain. But little by little, the warmth faded. The conversations shortened. Her presence became an afterthought. Dinners turned into takeout she wasn't invited to share. She started noticing things missing, her favorite vase put away, the family portraits she'd hung quietly replaced with abstract art. Her chair at the table, moved to the garage, her routines, interrupted by new rules she was never consulted. On. And through it all, she smiled. She didn't want to cause tension. "It's their turn now," she told herself. "I've had my time." But she hadn't asked for time. She had asked only for dignity, for a place where her sacrifices weren't erased like chalk from a board, where her memories weren't boxed up and shoved in a basement. She thought of the bruises on her soul that no one had ever noticed, the jobs she was fired from because she had to leave early for a parent-teacher meeting, the nights she came home crying from exhaustion, the insults she swallowed from customers who thought a waitress had no value, but all of that had been worth it, she thought. Because she was raising a man who would never treat a woman like she was disposable. But here she was now, sitting below ground like she was a relic of another era, something no longer useful. And it cut deeper than any knife. It shattered the story she'd told herself all these years, that love, real love, would always be enough. She thought of how she used to watch him sleep as a child, memorizing every freckle, listening for each breath to be sure he was safe. She had once been his whole world. Now she wasn't even worth a proper room. She was a guest in the house she built with the very bones of her life. But worse, she was a ghost. She didn't know when the shift happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was the day he called her too much, or when his wife sighed every time she entered the room, or maybe it was when he stopped hugging her altogether. But what she did know, what she could now feel like a drumbeat in her chest, was that nothing she had given would ever be enough for people who had already decided she didn't matter. And that realization hurt more than any insult, because it meant her love had become invisible, Her sacrifices irrelevant. Her story erased. And the worst part? She had no one left to tell it to. The first time she realized she had been officially locked out of the guest room, it didn't even register. At first. She turned the knob as she always did, ready to grab the sweater she left draped on the bed, and it wouldn't budge. She tried again. Nothing. Then she noticed the small silver lock newly drilled into the doorframe, the kind that could be purchased from any hardware store for a few dollars. A lock. On her own home's door. Her hand trembled as she knocked, softly, hoping it was some sort of mistake. But it wasn't. She heard nothing from inside. No shuffling, no explanation. Just silence. And then, later that day, the cold announcement from her son, delivered like a memo. "We're going to be using that room for Mia's home office now. You're more comfortable downstairs anyway, right?" Comfortable. That word nearly made her laugh, though her throat clenched too tightly for sound. Comfortable, in a space with no window, no heat, where her knees ached from the chill in the floor, and the mattress sagged like it was tired too. She said nothing. She nodded, even, and her son nodded back like everything had been perfectly reasonable. He didn't see the betrayal written across her face. Or worse, he did and ignored it. Things spiraled quickly after that. Family dinners became private affairs. She would hear cutlery clinking and laughter through the floorboards while she ate leftovers in silence. Downstairs? Her presence, once, expected and welcomed, now felt like an interruption, a glitch in their carefully curated new life. There were Sunday mornings she woke up hopeful. Maybe this time they'd call her up, ask if she wanted to go to brunch, or join them for a walk. In the park, but no one came. The silence became its own language, a kind of weapon. Then came the birthday party. It was a Saturday in June, warm, breezy, the kind of day that should have felt like celebration. She had baked a cake the night before, her special, lemon glaze recipe that her son used to love. She was dusting it with powdered sugar when she heard voices upstairs, followed by music. Curious, she crept halfway up the basement stairs and peeked through the narrow door gap. Streamers, balloons, people, her son's co-workers, Mia's sister. Laughter again, but no invitation. She waited at the bottom of the stairs for hours, holding the cake like it was made of glass, not daring to intrude. Her heart pounded every time someone passed the door, as if she was the one who didn't belong. No one noticed. No one remembered. And when the door finally opened, it was to Mia's voice, sharp, exasperated, saying, "Could you not just come upstairs for everything? We had this planned. It's awkward." Awkward, that's what she had become. A shadow that made people uncomfortable. A walking reminder of age, of obligation, of roots they didn't want to acknowledge. When her son finally appeared behind his wife, he didn't say hello. Didn't look at her cake. He just said, "Can you give us space today, Mom? It's just easier. Easier." It was always about what was easier for them, not what was right, not what was kind. She nodded again. What else could she do? Her fingers gripped the edge of the cake plate until her knuckles went white. That night, she wrapped the untouched cake and placed it in the back of the fridge. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had become a constant, a dull throb too deep for tears. Days passed. She found the mail redirected to their names only. Her prescriptions were no longer picked up like they used to be. When she coughed at the table one morning, Mia scoffed and said, "Maybe it's time you considered a senior living community. This house is getting too stressful, for all of us." Her son said nothing. He didn't even flinch, and still she said nothing. She sat there, her heart thudding in her chest like a drum of humiliation, and took another sip of cold coffee. It tasted like ash. She wanted to scream. She wanted to remind them who built this house, who paid every damn bill, who wiped every tear from that boy's cheek. But the words never made it out. She was too stunned, too wounded. The betrayal ran so deep it left her numb. She went back down to the basement, back to the shadows and the old boxes and the dusty air, and for the first time in her life, she felt something shift inside her. Not rage, no, not yet. Something colder, a kind of cracking, like a river in winter, silent and frozen on the surface, but building pressure beneath, a knowing, a truth she hadn't wanted to face. She was no longer welcome, not in her own home. Not in her own story. She had become a burden to the people she once would have died for. And now they had made it clear. She was expected to shrink, to vanish, to stay in the basement. But what they didn't know was this. She had stopped crying. She had stopped waiting. And while she hadn't retaliated, not yet, something inside her had finally snapped. And when a woman like her breaks, she doesn't just fall apart. She starts to rebuild, quietly, deliberately, and with the kind of strength no one sees coming. The phone used to ring. Once upon a time, it lit up with life. Calls from her sister back in Michigan, check-ins from old co-workers, and the occasional FaceTime from a childhood friend just to laugh about the past. But now, it sat still on the edge of a dusty dresser, its screen dark like the rest of her world. No one called. Not anymore. Maybe they assumed she was busy, or worse, maybe they had sensed what she hadn't wanted to say out loud, that she was no longer part of the world upstairs. That she had faded into some quiet, sad corner of her own life, and no one wanted to witness the descent. She reached out at first. She texted her cousin in Ohio, sent a cheerful message to a friend from church. No one replied. Some messages were read, but not answered. Others never even marked as seen. At first, she made excuses for them. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe the timing was bad. But the weeks stretched into months, and the silence told a truth she didn't want to hear. They knew. Or they'd guessed. And they didn't want to get involved. No one wanted to hear a mother say, "My son put me in the basement." It made people uncomfortable. It made them feel guilty. She remembered her last birthday. It fell on a Tuesday, cool and gray. She woke up early, like always, brushed her hair, and put on the soft blue cardigan she kept folded neatly in the corner. She lit a candle in the basement alone, whispered a quiet wish, and waited. Not for a party, not even for a hug, just for something. A knock on the door, a warm smile. But it never came. The cake she had hoped for never appeared. There were no balloons, no card. Just footsteps above and laughter that wasn't meant for her. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence around her louder than any insult. That was the day something inside her truly broke. Not with rage, but with sorrow so deep it wrapped around her bones like frost. It wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about being erased, bit by bit, memory by memory, until the world no longer recognized her as part of it. The holidays were worse. Thanksgiving came and went with smells, wafting down the basement stairs, rosemary, turkey, cinnamon, but no invitation. She watched a Hallmark movie on her cracked tablet, trying to feel something, anything, but even the actors looked too happy, too distant. She forced a smile through tears, chewing a peanut butter sandwich while her son carved a turkey upstairs. She was less than a guest. She was an afterthought. Even the mail seemed to avoid her. Birthday cards from nieces stopped arriving. Her name was slowly dropped from group messages. There were no visits from cousins, no Sunday calls from her older sister. When she called one of them herself and tried to speak casually, "Oh, just been busy, you know how life gets," she was met with awkward silence. "Well, tell Jason I said hi," they'd say. But Jason never asked about her. Jason never mentioned her at all. The house had grown colder, not in temperature, but in energy. It pulsed with indifference, humming with a subtle cruelty she couldn't quite name. Mia never made eye contact anymore. She spoke with clipped politeness, like addressing someone who had overstayed her welcome at a hotel. Her son, her baby boy, had become someone else entirely. Kindness had drained from his face, replaced by apathy. When she spoke, he nodded without hearing. When she asked for a light bulb change or a small errand, he sighed like she was the weight he'd never asked to carry. She kept to herself. She crocheted quietly in the corner. She read old books until her eyes hurt. She stopped wearing makeup, stopped brushing her hair some days. What was the point? No one saw her. No one wanted to. Some mornings, she wondered what would happen if she didn't wake up. Would they notice? Would they even come downstairs before the smell of rot forced them to? The thought frightened her, not because of death, but because of the indifference that might follow it. She thought about leaving. She fantasized about it sometimes, packing a small suitcase, walking out the front door, never looking back. But where would she go? Who would take her in? She had given so much of herself away for so long that she had nothing left, not even a place to run to. The basement became her world, her prison, her coffin in waiting. And yet, even in that darkness, some small flicker remained. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was memory of who she had once been, of how brightly she had lived before they dimmed her. That ember, tiny and stubborn, refused to go out, and in that ember lived a promise. She would not die this way, not in silence, not in shame, not in someone else's basement. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind that made the basement feel even darker than usual. The water trickled along the tiny gap near the wall, echoing in the silence like a soft reminder of everything that had leaked out of her life. She was rummaging through a faded cardboard box labeled Memories, hoping to find an old photo album just to see her mother's face again, when her fingers brushed something hard and unfamiliar. It wasn't a picture frame or a trinket, it was a folder. Thick, yellowed, with edges curled like dried leaves. Curious, she pulled it out, blew off the dust, and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, carefully bound, brittle with time. Her breath caught when she saw the title at the top of the first page, Warranty Deed. She blinked, her eyes tracing the familiar address of the house she currently lived in, the one she had been exiled within. But what stunned her wasn't the address. It was the names. Hers. Only hers. Her heart pounded as she flipped through the pages, hands trembling. It was all there. The deed had never been transferred. All those years, she'd assumed Jason had added his name after college when he moved back in briefly with his new wife. He hadn't. Or maybe he never even asked. The house was still legally hers. She sat down slowly, the page gripped tightly in her hand. Something in her shifted, like the earth turning beneath her feet. A quiet strength seeped back into her limbs, one she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just a ghost in someone else's home. She was the owner of it. The foundation beneath, their lives, the walls they argued in, the ceilings under which they slept, it was all still hers. She couldn't help but laugh softly, not with amusement, but with disbelief. The power she thought had been stripped from her had merely been misplaced, forgotten, but not gone, not dead. She kept reading, deeper into the folder. Behind the deed was a faded envelope, her name written in her own mother's script. Inside was a letter and a small booklet. The letter, dated 15 years ago, was a reminder from her mother, after she passed, in case you ever need it. It explained the savings account her mother had opened for her in secret, just in her name, just in case. The booklet showed a modest sum, not life-changing, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to begin. That night, she stayed up late, staring at both the deed and the bank booklet. She didn't sleep, not out of anxiety, but out of thought. Deep, layered thought, the kind of thinking that had nothing to do with grief anymore, and everything to do with possibility. The next morning, she took a bus downtown. It was the first time she'd left the house in weeks. She wore her nicest blouse, the one with the pearl buttons, even though it was wrinkled from storage. She stepped into the law office of Helen Grant, her old friend from church, who had once helped her with a parking ticket years ago. Helen had aged, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. The moment she saw the papers, her expression shifted from polite concern to quiet awe. "Do you know what this means?" Helen asked. "I think I do," she replied, voice steadier than she expected. Helen leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses. "They've been living in your house, treating you like an unwanted guest in something they don't even own. And I see here, no power of attorney, no transfer, nothing. You are the sole legal owner. That gives you more control than you realize." Nodded slowly. "I didn't have control for so long. I thought I'd lost everything. But this changes things." Helen smiled gently. "You don't have to rush, but if you're thinking what I think you are, just know, I can help." Walking out of that office, the city air hit her like spring. It felt clean, open. She was no longer the woman hiding in the shadows of her own home. Something had come alive in her again. Not anger, not vengeance. Something quieter, stronger. Intention. She clutched her purse tighter, her fingers brushing against the crisp deed inside. She didn't know exactly what the plan would look like. Not yet. But a seed had been planted. And with every step she took toward home, it was already beginning to bloom. Back in the basement, she placed the deed in a new folder, wrapped it in fabric, and tucked it beneath her mattress. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same one that had once held her sorrow like a sponge, and for the first time in what felt like years, she smiled. Not the kind of smile she forced for politeness, a real one, quiet, calm, the kind that comes before a storm, because now she knew she still had one thing left, and that was more than enough to start again. She moved with the grace of someone who had been underestimated too many times and finally found power in being overlooked. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no raised voices echoing through hallways, just quiet steps, careful hands, and an unshakable calm that had taken months of humiliation to cultivate. Her strength no longer came from trying to be heard, but from knowing she didn't have to speak at all. Not yet. The following weeks became a ritual of subtle movements. She'd wake up before sunrise, quietly tiptoeing up the stairs before anyone else stirred. She retrieved her mail no one had bothered to check anymore, and made her way to the corner cafe with a folder tucked discreetly beneath her coat. There, over weak coffee and sunlight spilling through cracked blinds, she reviewed papers. With Helen, page by page, clause by clause. Each signature she added was a stitch in the fabric of her future. Her name alone now rested on the fresh documents, not just reaffirming ownership of the house, but transferring her legal power to act as she wished, unchallenged, uncontested. No co-owner, no clause for Jason, no shared inheritance. She was binding her independence, one pen stroke at a time. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. They hadn't asked her about her day in months anyway. Back at the house, her movements remained quiet and controlled. She still folded the laundry when no one else would. She still wiped down the counters, picked up the mail, even watered the succulents Mia always forgot. There was something poetic in it, serving a household that didn't see her, even as she reclaimed ownership over it, inch by inch. They saw her as a shadow, a burden, and that blindness became her shield. They weren't watching her. They weren't listening, and that meant they didn't see the storm coming. Jason barely spoke to her now, unless something needed to be fixed or cleaned. "Mom, the washing machine's making that noise again." Or, "Can you move your things out of the hallway? It looks cluttered when guests come." His voice carried the dull edge of someone speaking to a tenant, not a parent. She'd nod, smile, then go back downstairs and quietly tick another item off her checklist. Mia, too, had slipped into a routine of shallow civility. Cold, polite, like a woman playing the role of daughter-in-law while making sure the lines of hierarchy stayed clear. "If you could avoid using the upstairs bathroom when we have company, that would be great," she'd say, a soft smile not quite reaching her eyes. And still, she nodded. Still, she complied. Every moment of obedience was deliberate now, a curtain drawn, while the stage behind it transformed. She started sorting through the boxes she'd once cried over, not to mourn, but to prepare. She donated what no longer held meaning. She photographed old items for appraisal. She listed a few antiques online and quietly sold them off. The funds were transferred to the same dormant account her mother had, once opened for her, now breathing with life again. She wasn't just regaining space. She was rebuilding a future. The day she met with the real estate agent, she dressed in gray slacks and a lavender blouse. She looked like a woman conducting business, not seeking permission, not asking for understanding. The agent, a woman in Mayor, her early 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient air, took one walk through the property and said, "It's in a great location. If priced well, it'll move quickly." She nodded. "That's what I want." Not once did she mention the son upstairs, or the wife, or the basement. She arranged the initial paperwork for the sale, but asked the agent to hold off on listing it until she gave the final word. She wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Not yet. Not until every piece was in place. She wanted it to be clean, irrefutable. She wasn't after chaos. She was after clarity. And the most powerful part? They still had no idea. They laughed upstairs, made plans, posted pictures of their date nights and wine tastings. Jason talked about maybe getting a dog. Mia hinted at redecorating the living room, something brighter, more modern. They treated the house like it was already theirs, like her presence was just a technicality. That ignorance became a kind of poetry she relished. Because every decision they made was built on a false assumption. She didn't need to slam doors. She didn't need to argue her worth. She had found a deeper form of power, one that didn't need noise. And in the silence, she had finally heard herself again. This wasn't revenge. Not really. This was reclamation. And when the final paper would be signed and the deed would pass hands to someone new, they wouldn't be able to say they didn't see it coming, because the truth was, they never looked at her long enough to see anything at all. It started with a knock on the door. Jason opened it, half-dressed, a towel slung over his shoulder, clearly expecting a package or neighbor. Instead, a well-dressed woman with a clipboard and a sharp smile stood on the porch. "Good morning. I'm here for the final walkthrough before the property goes live on the market." Her voice was cheerful, professional. Jason blinked, confused. "What property?" She tilted her head. "This one. Didn't your mother tell?" "You? The listing goes live in 48 hours." Behind him, Mia appeared, wearing one of her silk robes, eyebrows already lifting in irritation. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. This is our house." The agent smiled again, a practiced expression. "Actually, ma'am, the legal documents list your mother-in-law as the sole owner. I assure you everything is in perfect order." Jason's voice cracked then. She can't sell the house. She wouldn't do that." But she could. And she had. They found her sitting at the small kitchen table, sipping her tea. She didn't flinch when they stormed in. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked up and said softly, "You should start packing." The silence that followed hit harder than any scream. Jason looked stunned, pale. Mia stared like she'd been slapped. "You can't be serious," she whispered, though it came out more like a hiss. "Where are we supposed to go?" Her voice was sharper now, desperate. "You're throwing us out? Out of our home?" "Our?" she echoed gently. "I bought this house 32 years ago, paid every cent myself. You never put a dime into it. You just moved in, and then told me to stay in the basement like I was the help." Jason stepped forward. "Mom, come on. You're upset. You're overreacting. Let's talk." I asked for nothing from either of you," she interrupted, still calm. "Not money, not space, not respect. I gave everything, and in return, I was erased. Well, now I'm rewriting the ending." He opened his mouth to argue again, but she stood before he could speak. "The house is mine, the deed, the savings, the will, all mine, and I've made new arrangements." She walked past him and dropped a sealed envelope onto the countertop. "You won't be in it, either of you." Mia reached for it, but Jason caught her wrist, suddenly unsure, as if touching it would make it all real. "This is insane. What about everything I did for you? What about Dad leaving and me helping? You get through it?" She turned then, slow and steady. "You don't get to count your childhood as currency. That's not how love works. I raised you, I fed you, clothed you, protected you. I sat through school plays and late-night stomach bugs. I worked 3 jobs to keep you from ever knowing hunger. That was my job. I did it with love, and I would have done it forever. But when the roles reversed and I needed the smallest kindness—" "You gave me a basement," Mia's voice cracked now. "People will think you're cruel." She finally let a smile slip across her lips. People already know, because 2 days earlier, she had written a letter, not a bitter one, not full of venom, but a soft, aching truth. She posted it to a small Facebook group she used to be active in for local women in the community. The post read, "I raised my son in this house, alone. I gave everything I had, years of work, health, joy. And when he had a family of his own, I welcomed them here, hoping only for love in return. Instead, I was put in the basement, forgotten, told to stay out of sight, but I found strength in silence. And today, I'm reclaiming the life I built, not for revenge, but for dignity." It was shared over 9,000 times in less than 48 hours. The comments poured in, mothers, grandmothers, strangers who had lived that same quiet betrayal. The post made its way into local news, even a few national outlets that loved a twist of poetic justice. "Mother sells home. After being forced to live in basement," the headlines read, always with a photo of the house in soft lighting. And with every share, every comment of solidarity, she felt something return that had been missing for years. Visibility, voice, value. People started talking, neighbors whispered. Friends who hadn't called in years sent her messages. "I had no idea. You were always so strong." Jason's co-workers asked uncomfortable questions at the office. Mia's sister posted something passive-aggressive about greedy matriarchs who can't let go. But no one believed them. The public had chosen a side. And this time, it was hers. They begged. For an extension. For mercy. For time to figure things out, she gave them 30 days, exactly what the law required, nothing more. Because mercy wasn't a game anymore, it was a choice. And she was done choosing people who didn't choose her back. Helen helped manage the sale. The buyer was a retired couple who planned to renovate the house and turn it into a bed and breakfast. The irony made her smile. The day they moved out, Jason didn't speak. His eyes were red. Not just from shame, but from the realization that he had gambled everything and lost. Mia didn't say goodbye, just slammed the car door and drove off, as if the house had wronged her. When the door finally closed behind them, she stood in, the center of the empty living room. The light came in through the same windows she used to clean every weekend. She looked up at the ceiling, took a long breath, and let it out slow. She wasn't sad, she was free. There would be no going back. No regret, only forward. Because she had taken everything back, not out of cruelty, but out of love for herself. And in doing so, she became the woman her son would never forget. The one he should have never taken for granted. The first call came a week after the moving trucks pulled away. She watched the phone ring from her new apartment, small but sunlit, nestled in a quiet complex where no one raised their voice or told her to stay out of the way. Jason's name blinked on the screen. For a moment, her thumb hovered over the green icon. Old instincts rose, memories of him as a boy, calling her in the middle of the night after a nightmare, needing comfort. But that boy was gone. And the man he became had told her to stay in the basement. She turned the phone face down and let it ring into silence. The next day, there was a voicemail. His voice trembled between guilt and desperation. "Mom, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I messed up. I know I did. Can we talk? Just, please, call me." She listened, eyes dry, heart unmoved. Not because she didn't feel, but because she had felt too much for far too long. Text messages followed. "I'm sorry. Can we meet? I miss you." She read every word but never replied, because what he was trying to reclaim wasn't her forgiveness. It was his own comfort. He wanted to soothe his conscience, but her silence was no longer a punishment. It was protection. Then the messages turned sharp. Accusations disguised as grief. "You really sold the house out from under us? Do you even care what you've done to our lives? Mia's parents think we're crazy." She imagined them scrambling now, trying to find a rental on short notice, dealing with credit checks and rejection, learning for the first time what it felt like to not belong. Poetic, in a way. They had evicted her emotionally. Now the world returned the favor. Weeks passed, and the tone shifted again. "I'm in between jobs. We're staying with Mia's sister. It's cramped. This isn't how it was supposed to go." He still didn't understand. He still thought life owed him comfort, that she owed him softness no matter how callous he'd been. She sat on her balcony, the morning sun warming her cheeks, and watched sparrows dance in the trees. A fresh plant sat on the table beside her, a gift from a neighbor who'd welcomed her with a pie and no questions. Here, she wasn't a burden. She was just herself. The final message came on her birthday. It was a photo, an old one from when he was 5, sitting in her lap, frosting on his cheeks, both of them grinning wildly. Beneath it, he wrote, "I miss this. I miss you. Please." She stared at it for a long time. She remembered that day. The little cake, the handmade paper crown. He insisted she wear. The way he clung to her arm and said, "You're the best mama in the world." And she remembered every birthday after that, especially the last one, when she sat alone in the basement while he threw a party without her. Love, she knew now, wasn't just about memories. It was about how you show up when it's hard, about whether you reach out with grace or push someone down when they're already low. And he had made his choice. Over and over. So she made hers. She deleted the photo and finally blocked the number. Her mornings were different now, no longer interrupted by the sound of someone else's footsteps above her head. No passive-aggressive sighs from across the room. Just silence, the good kind, the kind that wrapped around her like a soft shawl, warmed by the sun filtering through open windows. Her apartment wasn't large, but it was hers. A modest one-bedroom on the second floor of a quiet building, with creaky stairs and potted plants on every windowsill. Outside, an old oak tree swayed in the breeze, scattering light and shadow across her living room floor like a dance of memories and new beginnings. She had made a few friends here. It surprised her how naturally it happened. There was Doris, who lived across the hall and always knocked before Wheel of Fortune, just in case they wanted to watch together. Clara from 2B ran the community garden and gave her a small space to grow lavender and thyme. No one asked about her past unless she offered, and when she did, they listened. Not with pity, but with quiet understanding. Many of them had stories, like hers, echoes of the same disappointment and the same resilience. Here, she was no longer the burden. She was just herself. That was enough. She'd begun painting again, too. Something she hadn't done since her 20s. Her small dining table was now covered in brushes and watercolors. Soft strokes of sky, of open roads, of faceless women standing strong against bright backdrops. She didn't need to sell them. She painted for herself, for the joy of creation. For the freedom of making something beautiful with hands that had once been used only to clean, to carry, to serve. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit on the balcony with a cup of tea and let the wind play with her hair. She'd think about her son, about what he took and what he gave, about who he had become and who she had become because of him. She didn't hate him. She couldn't. But she no longer longed for his apology or his approval. She had stopped defining herself through the people who failed to see her. Maybe, she realized, the burden wasn't her. Maybe the burden was carried by those who couldn't see love unless it served them, who mistook devotion for obligation, who didn't know that a woman like her could burn down everything and rise up stronger from the ashes. Family, she had learned, wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was a neighbor who brought you soup when you sneezed, or a kind smile in the elevator, or just your own reflection, finally seen with compassion. For the first time in years, she felt whole. She had been discarded like an old photo, faded, forgotten. But now, she was a story being rewritten in bold ink, on her own terms, in her own voice, and she would never again live in anyone's basement. The table was small, just enough for one, but it sat by the window where golden light spilled in, warming the chipped wood like an old friend's embrace. She set the plate down carefully. Nothing extravagant. Just a roasted chicken thigh, some green beans, and her favorite sweet cornbread with honey butter. No plastic containers. No cold leftovers in the basement. No waiting for permission to come upstairs. She lit a candle, not because anyone was watching, but because she liked the flicker, the way it danced without asking for attention. The chair didn't creak from neglect. It welcomed her, supported her. The silence no longer stung. It hummed. Gentle. Safe. Her own. She took the first bite slowly, savoring it. No footsteps overhead. No laughter behind a closed door. Just her. The meal and the moment. Her hands, once used to cook for people who forgot to say thank you, now served herself. There was no bitterness left in her chest. Only clarity. Peace. And when she looked out the window, past the blooms on her windowsill, past the shadows of the past, she smiled to herself, soft but sure. This time she ate at her table, alone and free.